Greg Swenson joins us now. He's chairman of Republicans Overseas UK. Good afternoon to you, Greg.
Hello, Julia. Nice to see you.
Thank you for joining us. Appreciate it. And I want to talk to you about, again, a war started by Vladimir Putin of Russia, invasion of Ukraine back in February 2022. War that's still ongoing, a war of attrition, huge number of casualties, huge number of wounded men, huge number of killed men, and indeed many, many civilians as well in Ukraine being killed, and also tens of thousands of children abducted by Russia. It's a horrific, horrific war. Donald Trump has always said he wanted to end it. He said he'd do it on day one when he became president. Well, didn't work out quite so easily. But we've had lots of developments in the last few weeks. I think there was talk about sending, long-range missiles, Tomahawk missiles, to the Ukrainians to help them defeat Russia. Been talk about him having big rows with Zelensky in the White House and insisting he basically has to concede even more territory than Russia's already got in return for a ceasefire deal. A phone call with Vladimir Putin, and then yesterday we got the announcement of some pretty serious new sanctions on the Russians' energy sector, which Donald Trump says could actually really hit Putin's ability to fund his war. Really simple question, Greg. What the hell is going on in the White House?
Well, I think that, the president is an anti-war president. He's very much a peace president. So he will use every diplomatic or economic tool first before he will either allow Tomahawk missiles or sell Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine or, escalate this war. And so, first he tried diplomacy, didn't work. That's not on him. That's on Putin. And then, of course, you've had economic sanctions in the past with Russia, but they were pretty toothless during the Biden years and didn't work. I mean, the Russian economy is in trouble, but not severe trouble. They're still growing, and they still have money, although he's depleted the sovereign wealth fund from 130 bill to down to 31 billion or something like that, 117 to down to 31. So, there's some challenges for Putin, but this is something that's much more serious. You saw, oil's up $5 a barrel, probably, I think it's roughly 6%. That is significant. It's like basically half of the oil that's sold by Russia every day comes through two companies, Rosneft and Lukoil, and it looks like that's by sanctioning those two companies, it takes 2 million barrels a day off the market. Now, India is a big part of that. They're not buying quite as much as China. They're buying 1.6 million barrels a day versus China at 2 million. But I think that's still significant. And with China cooperating here, India cooperating, I think these sanctions will have some legs.
Well, this is the thing. I've always been of view. We know China's an enemy state. even if, our government doesn't apparently realise it. But I've always found it extraordinary that India just playing along. There we are. We'll buy the oil. Are you whose side are you on? Pick a side would have been my response as a US president and indeed European leaders. But we've also had European countries who've been happily buying the oil. So they're contributing weaponry and money to buy weaponry to send to Ukraine and talking the talk and hugging President Zelensky and saying, isn't it all terrible, condemning Vladimir Putin, and at the same time buying his oil, funding the war against the Ukrainians.
Yeah, they're funding both sides. So they bought $22 billion worth of oil last year, most of it in the form of refined products from India.
But they know where it comes from.
Yes, India buys the cheap Russian oil, they process it or refine it and send it on. And so, the 22 billion was actually higher than the contributions to Ukraine last year. And so I think that's one thing that was really annoying the president. And the president was very vocal about that. He slapped 50% tariffs on India a few months back, and everybody was whining about, his disruptive nature, and he was getting into a spat with an ally. Well, there were some pretty good reasons for that. And look what happened. Modi came around yesterday. They had a phone call, and Modi's on board. And,
that's the thing. And that was the only That was the only thing that was going to work, wasn't it? But this is the thing. What a lot of people don't understand is like, look, yeah, people can have their views on where they are in Israel and Gaza. I'm sorry, it seems to me to be as black and white as Ukraine is. And it absolutely stuns me that anyone doesn't get it. You know, in Israel and Gaza, there is one victim and one perpetrator. Ukraine and Russia, there is one victim, one perpetrator. And yet your president has again and again and again seemed to say, it's like, he said, she said, and Vladimir Putin, we have to help him. He's even, you know, I mean, happy, you know, roll roll out the red carpet for him, giving him a lift in the Beast, his big armour-driven limo when they met in Alaska. A huge victory on the propaganda front for Vladimir Putin when this man has invaded a sovereign democratic nation state.
I see that you're playing the clip, or the producer's playing the clip from Alaska, and look, but as I said, the President Trump is he's a peace president.
I think that's a load of nonsense. I mean, we're all in favour of peace. Sometimes, if he wanted peace, he could arm the Ukrainians to the hilt, and then they could end the war by defeating Russia. That's how you get peace.
I'm not sure that they could defeat Russia, even with all the arms in the world. And so this is a stalemate, and everybody knows it. Mark Milley told Biden this 2 years ago. Zelensky's chief of staff or military chief of staff also told Zelensky that. So Zelensky fired him. Biden ignored Mark Milley. And here we are 2 years later with a lot more body bags. So, look, I think the president, as I said, likes to run with diplomacy first. He tried that. It didn't work, okay? Guilty as charged. Now he's using economic leverage. He's using a little bit more aggression. He's teased with the idea of Tomahawk missiles. That opens up a couple of other issues that are complicated.
And when he did tease it, then Vladimir Putin was willing to meet with him in Hungary. And when he took it off the table, suddenly that meeting disappeared. That tells you everything.
Yeah, it does. And I think that's why he's going with the economic sanctions. He still can tease the Tomahawks out there. I mean, look, there is some, as I mentioned, there's complications there. Those Tomahawks are always fired from U.S. naval submarines and surface ships. They can't be fired from U.S. subs and ships. They have to be fired on the ground in Ukraine. That's going to require American help and American intelligence. That brings America more directly into the war. So, then we've got a nuclear power fighting each other, and that's not pleasant.
Yeah, I think we are already at war with Russia, and everyone needs to get with the programme personally. But I understand those concerns, absolutely. Greg Swenson, Chairman of Republicans Overseas UK, so appreciate you joining us for that. And we didn't get to talk about the new ballroom at the White House, which apparently is the only thing that Donald Trump actually cares about, knocking down the East Wing. It's quite bizarre. But Benedict, come back in on this issue.
I mean,
not the ballroom.
I was just cock my head there and go, oh, really? That's unexpected. But no, I mean, the thing is, I'm afraid to say, and you know that I feel very strongly about the issue of Ukraine and self-determination. The problem is we are so deep now into the conflict, and Ukraine has lost so much in terms of its manpower, that the assessment that it can defeat the Russians if you just give it the weapons, I don't think that bears out anymore. I think ultimately, you said it yourself, you think that the West is effectively at war with Russia. Yes, I'd agree with that. And I think a lot of Western nations have to hang their heads in shame that they didn't wake up to that early enough. They didn't arm the Ukrainians early enough. And when they did, they put all kinds of constraints saying, well, you can't use this here and you can't use this there. That was the thing that did for the Ukrainians. They did a fantastic job, actually, of stymieing the Russian invasion. There was a window in which they could have pushed them back to the point where maybe Russia would have been forced to come to the negotiating table. I'm afraid to say I think that window has long since gone, ultimately, and that is the fault of Ukraine's allies, not Ukraine itself.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Benedict Spence, for that.